Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B creaked open, and Naomi Brooks stepped inside, her heels tapping a steady rhythm against the polished marble floor. She wore a simple navy dress that skimmed her knees and carried a worn leather purse pressed close to her side, looking every bit like the quiet, ordinary wife everyone believed her to be. The overhead lights picked up the warm undertones of her smooth brown skin, but it was her eyes that drew attention. Deep, thoughtful, and tired, they carried a sadness that 3 years of marriage had carved into her. Naomi paused for half a heartbeat, steadying her breath, then walked down the aisle toward the defendant's table, as if she were walking into a storm she already knew she would not be able to outrun. At the plaintiff's table sat her husband, Kendrick Brooks, with his attorney. Kendrick's close-cropped hair was lined up to perfection, his beard neatly edged, his charcoal suit clearly tailored. He leaned back with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Beside him sat his sister, LaToya, in a fitted emerald dress, her long braids pulled into an elegant bun. LaToya leaned close and whispered something in Kendrick's ear, and he smirked before both of them turned to watch Naomi approach. LaToya's painted lips curved into a cool, satisfied smile, the kind that said she believed everything was already in motion and there was nothing Naomi could do to stop it. Naomi's own lawyer, Mr. Peterson, rose as she reached the table. He was a kind older attorney with soft gray hair and a gentle voice, the sort of man who mostly handled simple divorces and custody disputes in their small Illinois city. He had warned Naomi that Kendrick's team was aggressive, that they were claiming she was mentally unstable and unfit to receive any assets from the marriage. Naomi had listened quietly, hands folded in her lap, and told him she understood. Now she settled into her chair, nodding once when he leaned down and murmured, "We will take it one step at a time." She did not tell him that this entire proceeding was only one layer of what she had prepared. On the other side of the courtroom, Kendrick's attorney, Mr. Everett, checked his notes with the brisk efficiency of someone who believed he had the stronger case. He had built a reputation on messy divorces where emotions raged and facts blurred, and he trusted the stack of papers in front of him. Psychiatric recommendations, witness statements, and carefully crafted narratives about a wife who had, supposedly, lost touch with reality. Kendrick shifted in his seat, giving Naomi a look that mixed annoyance with false concern, as if he were a man heartbroken over a spouse who could not be helped. LaToya touched Kendrick's wrist and tilted her head, studying Naomi like a problem that was about to be solved. "All rise," the bailiff called. The courtroom stood as the Honorable Judge Harold Parker entered. Judge Parker was in his 60s, with deep lines carved around his mouth and eyes that seemed to see straight through people. He had started his career as a public defender before working his way up through the state courts, and lawyers across the city knew him for his stern demeanor and reputation for being tough on anyone who wasted the court's time. Kendrick had specifically requested him, believing that Judge Parker would be sympathetic to a husband claiming his wife was unstable and unreasonable. Kendrick wanted a judge who would not hesitate to sign commitment papers if the evidence seemed convincing enough. Judge Parker settled into his chair and opened the case file with practiced calm. His gaze swept across the courtroom in a quick, professional scan, lingering for a moment on Kendrick, then on LaToya, then on Mr. Everett. When his eyes reached the defense table and fell on Naomi, everything changed. The thin folder slipped from his hands, papers spilling across the bench like scattered leaves. For an instant, the usually composed judge stared at Naomi as though he had seen something impossible. His mouth parted slightly, and the courtroom fell into a stunned silence at the sight of a man known for his composure visibly shaken. "Your Honor," Mr. Everett asked, startled, his confidence wobbling. "Are you all right?" The bailiff bent to help collect the scattered documents, but Judge Parker barely seemed to notice. Naomi's pulse beat loudly in her ears. She had expected hostility, suspicion, maybe impatience, but not this recognition. She could feel Kendrick's gaze digging into the side of her face, could sense LaToya's confusion, but she kept her eyes fixed on the judge, wondering which piece of her past had just stepped into the room with her. Judge Parker cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, but his gaze did not leave Naomi. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual, as if he were forcing it back under control. "We will begin by confirming the identities for the record." He glanced down at the file, then back at Naomi. "Could the defendant please state her full legal name?" Mr. Peterson rose automatically. Your Honor, my client is legally known as Naomi Brooks, married name from her union with the plaintiff, and her maiden name is. The judge's eyes lifted sharply. Her maiden name? He asked, his tone different now, heavier. Naomi stood slowly, feeling every eye in the courtroom on her. She could feel Kendrick staring, his confusion beginning to twist into unease. LaToya's arms were folded now, as if bracing against something she did not understand. Mr. Peterson looked briefly at Naomi, then nodded for her to continue. Naomi drew in a breath. She had promised herself that if this moment came, she would not hide. My maiden name is Naomi Ellis, Your Honor. The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was charged. People in the gallery shifted, whispering under their breath. Mr. Everett frowned and began rifling through his notes, as if expecting to see that name somewhere and realizing he never had. Judge Parker leaned back slowly, studying Naomi with new eyes. Ellis, he repeated, and now there was no mistaking the recognition. And your father's name is Brooks? For the first time since she entered the courtroom, Naomi's hands trembled. She had spent 3 years building a life where no one asked that question, a life where her last name was ordinary and her history invisible. Your Honor, Mr. Everett cut in quickly, irritation sharpening his voice. I fail to see how the defendant's family history is relevant to these proceedings. This is a divorce and mental health matter, not. Judge Parker turned his gaze on him, and the rest of the protest died in his throat. Mr. Everett, the judge said quietly, I will decide what is relevant in my courtroom. He turned back to Naomi and waited. She could have lied. It would have been easy, one more false story to stack on top of all the others she had told strangers about where she came from. But she was tired of hiding. My father is Leonard Ellis, Your Honor, she said softly. A murmur broke across the gallery. One woman covered her mouth. Mr. Peterson's eyes went wide. Kendrick's face drained of color, and LaToya's hand clamped down on his forearm in a grip that looked almost painful. Judge Parker nodded slowly, as if a puzzle piece had clicked into place. Supreme Court Justice Leonard Ellis, he said, not as a question, but as a statement that rolled through the courtroom like a shockwave. Naomi lifted her chin. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Everett stared at his papers, flipping through pages that suddenly felt useless. Kendrick shifted, tugging at his tie as sweat gathered at his hairline. Your Honor, there must be some mistake, Kendrick said, his voice cracking. My wife is just a bookkeeper. She told me her parents died when she was young. She has no family money, no connections. His words faded as he looked at Naomi with dawning horror. Mr. Brooks, Judge Parker said, his expression unreadable. It appears there are many things about your wife you do not know. He closed the case file and folded his hands. Given this new information, we will take a brief recess so that counsel on both sides can review the record. The gavel struck once, and the courtroom broke into a low roar of voices as people stood. Naomi remained where she was for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of the name she had tried so hard to bury settling back around her shoulders like an old, heavy coat she had once sworn never to wear again. As the bailiff announced the recess, Kendrick turned to LaToya with wild eyes. Did you know about this? He hissed. Justice Ellis? Supreme Court Justice Ellis. LaToya shook her head, her composure finally cracking. No, she whispered. That cannot be right. We looked into her. We checked records, searched social media, everything. There was nothing. Mr. Everett leaned across the table, speaking in a low, hurried tone. You did not mention that your wife shared a last name with one of the most powerful judges in the country. Do you understand what this means for your petition? For the psychiatric recommendation? We thought she was lying about having nothing, Kendrick muttered. We thought she was hiding money, not, he trailed off, staring at Naomi, who had turned to speak quietly with a group of people now gathering around her. Mr. Peterson stepped aside, making room for 3 new attorneys who entered during the recess and moved to Naomi's side with practiced ease. The tallest of them, a woman in a tailored black suit with natural curls swept away from her face, shook Naomi's hand and took a seat at the defense table. I am Attorney Carla Benson, she said in a low voice. We have everything ready. Behind her sat a man with broad shoulders and calm eyes, flipping open a notebook, Malcolm Price, a former federal investigator. Next to him, a middle-aged woman in a burgundy blazer, Dr. Nadine Porter, glanced briefly at Naomi, then at the opposing table, her expression cool and assessing. Naomi exhaled slowly. The facade of the quiet bookkeeper was still in place on the surface, but beneath it her true life was already moving into position. As Judge Parker's door closed behind him, Naomi's thoughts slid back to the morning when the life she had built as Naomi Ellis finally crumbled 3 years earlier. Before she had become Naomi Brooks, before she had stepped into this courtroom, she had been a different version of herself entirely. She had been the woman who walked away from Washington, District of Columbia, from cameras and headlines and late-night talk show jokes about legal dynasties and the children of powerful judges. She had been the woman who had taken off an expensive suit, packed 2 bags, and driven until the city lights were nothing but a memory in her rearview mirror. 6 months after she disappeared from that world, Naomi sat in a quiet coffee shop on 5th Street in a Midwestern city that barely made national news. She had legally changed her name back to Ellis after leaving her father's house, then taken the last name Brooks only after her marriage to Kendrick. At that time, she introduced herself simply as Naomi Ellis. Her accounting textbook lay open beside her laptop as she worked through spreadsheets for the small bookkeeping firm that had hired her. There was comfort in the clean order of numbers, in bank reconciliations and expense reports, in the simple, private lives of local businesses whose biggest headaches were payroll glitches, not constitutional crises. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" a voice asked. Naomi looked up to see a tall man holding a paper coffee cup, shoulders slightly hunched as if he expected to be turned away. His dark brown eyes were framed by long lashes, and his smile was easy practiced. "No, go ahead," Naomi said, closing her textbook and moving her bag. "Thanks," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. "I am Kendrick, by the way. Kendrick Brooks." "Naomi," she said, returning his smile. "Nice to meet you." He nodded toward her open laptop. "You look like you actually understand what those numbers mean. You are already 10 steps ahead of me." They talked for nearly an hour. Kendrick explained that he had moved to the city to start a business consulting firm that helped small companies scale. He spoke about his ambitions with just enough self-deprecating humor to seem charming rather than arrogant. He asked about good restaurants, local parks, and the best places to hear live music. Naomi kept her answers simple, careful not to mention anything that might hint at Georgetown, Washington, or the life she had left. When she told him she worked as a bookkeeper, Kendrick's eyes lit up. "That is perfect," he said. "I am going to need someone to help me with the financial side of getting my business off the ground. Any chance you would be interested in taking on one more client?" Over the next few weeks, Kendrick became a regular part of Naomi's days. They met at the coffee shop to review his business plan, then at his modest office, where she helped him set up accounting software and project his first-year expenses. He always arrived with a fresh cup of coffee for her, making jokes about how he would be bankrupt if he did not get his finances under control. "I have to admit something," Kendrick said one evening as they wrapped up his quarterly projections. The office was quiet, the light outside fading into a soft blue. "I have started looking forward to these meetings for more than the business advice." Naomi felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "I have been enjoying them too," she said, and for once it was not an act. Their first official date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown, one with candles on the tables and a jazz trio playing softly in the corner. Naomi wore a simple green dress and small gold earrings that had belonged to her mother. Kendrick held the door for her, pulled back her chair, and asked questions that made her laugh. Favorite childhood snacks, least favorite subject in school, whether she would rather live near the ocean or the mountains. Eventually, his questions shifted toward family. "What about your parents?" he asked gently. "Do you talk to them often?" Naomi's smile dimmed for a moment as she slipped into the story she had prepared months before. "They died when I was young," she said quietly. "I put myself through college. I am just trying to build a peaceful life." Kendrick reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I admire that," he said. "There is something beautiful about someone who works hard and does not need flashy things to be happy." 6 months later, Kendrick proposed. It was simple and romantic, just the two of them sitting on a blanket by a small lake outside the city, the sun setting in streaks of orange and pink over the water. He pulled out a ring that was not extravagant, but had clearly been chosen with care. "Naomi," he said, his voice soft, "I want to build a life with you. A real life. No games, no pretenses. Just us." She said yes, believing him. The wedding took place in the courthouse with only a handful of people. Kendrick's sister LaToya stood beside him in a mustard-yellow dress, her braids falling over one shoulder. "He has told me so much about you," LaToya said as she hugged Naomi after the ceremony. "He says you are exactly what he has been looking for, Someone real, someone genuine, not like those people who only care about money and status. The first months of marriage were deceptively peaceful. Kendrick's consulting business appeared to be doing well. Naomi continued working as a bookkeeper, and the two of them bought a small house on a quiet street. They painted the kitchen together on a Saturday, arguing playfully over color samples. They hosted LaToya for dinner on weekends, watching movies and sharing inexpensive wine. Naomi began to believe that she had finally built the quiet life she had longed for. A life where no one cared who her father was or how many legal journals had once published her name. She still kept a box of newspaper clippings tucked away in a closet, but she rarely opened it. Then the questions began. At first, they were casual. Kendrick asked whether any relatives had left her anything when they passed away. LaToya wondered aloud if Naomi had ever considered looking into old insurance policies or forgotten savings accounts. "You never know," LaToya said lightly one night. "Sometimes people find out their grandparents left them something they did not know about." Naomi answered honestly. There was nothing. She had left her father's world with only her clothes and the money she had already earned on her own. Kendrick's expression tightened each time she said it. LaToya's questions grew more precise, about her college, her early jobs, the neighborhoods where she lived before moving here. Naomi answered carefully, always skirting the edges of the truth without stepping into it. The tone shifted from curiosity to suspicion. Naomi noticed Kendrick going through her mail more often, claiming he was sorting bills. LaToya's visits became more frequent, and sometimes Naomi would walk into the room to find the siblings in a hushed conversation that stopped the moment she entered. "We were just talking about business," Kendrick would say with an easy smile. LaToya would nod and change the subject, but the way she watched Naomi had changed. It was no longer simply affectionate. It was appraising, as if she were examining a puzzle she was determined to solve. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon when Naomi came home early from work with a throbbing headache. She stepped quietly into the house, planning to go straight upstairs for pain medicine, when she heard voices in the kitchen. She stopped just short of the doorway, her back pressed against the wall. "There has to be more to it," LaToya was saying, her voice low and sharp. "Nobody just appears out of nowhere with perfect credentials and no past. Look at how she handles money, the way she speaks, the way she carries herself. That is not someone who grew up with nothing." Kendrick sounded frustrated. "Maybe we are wrong," he said. "Maybe she really is exactly who she claims to be." "No way," LaToya replied. "If she is hiding something, you have a right to it. You are her husband. And if she is really just broke, then we cut our losses and find someone who is not." Naomi stood frozen in the hallway, the air thick around her. They were not talking about love or partnership. They were talking about a calculation, weighing her value against a hypothetical fortune that did not exist. That night, she began to notice more. Items in her dresser drawer slightly out of place, her computer browser history cleared even when she had not cleared it, a bank statement moved from the file where she usually kept it. The house that had once felt like a safe place began to feel like evidence waiting to be rearranged against her. She told herself she needed more proof before she made any decisions, but a hollow ache had settled in her chest where trust used to be. A few weeks later, Naomi caught LaToya in their bedroom. "Looking for something?" Naomi asked from the doorway. LaToya did not flinch. She turned around holding one of Naomi's old photo albums, the one Naomi thought she had buried behind winter coats at the back of their closet. In those photos, Naomi wore dresses tailored by designers famous in Washington, standing at receptions where politicians and judges mingled. In one shot, she stood at the edge of a room where her father delivered a speech, Jerome at her side, both of them smiling as if the weight of expectation were not already pressing down on their shoulders. "These are interesting pictures," LaToya said, flipping a page. "You look very comfortable at these events, almost like you belong there." "I used to work catering gigs in college," Naomi said calmly. "Sometimes they let us take pictures after the guests left." LaToya's smile sharpened. "Catering, right? Naomi, lies have a way of catching up with people, especially in a marriage." That night, Kendrick tried a different approach. As they prepared for bed, he sat on the edge of the mattress and took Naomi's hands. "I have been thinking about our future," he said. "About a bigger house, maybe starting a family. About not living like we are scraping by forever." "We are not scraping by," Naomi replied, pulling her hands back. "We are doing fine, but we need to stay realistic." Kendrick's expression hardened. "That is the thing. I do not understand why you are clinging to this idea of being broke when it is obvious you have had advantages. Your education, your confidence, the way you move in certain places. It does not add up. If your family left you something, you should trust me with it. I am your husband. I have told you everything about my finances, Naomi answered, her voice flat. There is nothing else. Kendrick's jaw clenched. I want to believe that, Naomi. But my wife acts like someone who is hiding who she really is. It was in that moment that Naomi understood her marriage was not just troubled. It was over. Kendrick no longer saw her as a person. He saw her as a locked safe that refused to open. LaToya's cold curiosity, the constant searching through her things, the subtle gaslighting when she questioned them. It all formed a pattern she could not ignore. She lay awake that night listening to Kendrick's steady breathing beside her, staring at the ceiling and thinking of the life she had once led, the courtroom where her name had been spoken with admiration rather than suspicion. She had thought she could outrun that version of herself. She had been wrong. The final blow came on a rainy Thursday evening in October, exactly 2 years after her younger brother Jerome's death. Naomi had stayed late at the office, trying to close the books on several clients. When she pulled into the driveway close to 10 o'clock, she noticed Kendrick's car already parked out front. He had told her he would be home early. The house was dark except for a soft glow spilling from the living room. Naomi stepped inside and froze. The low, breathless sounds coming from the next room were unmistakable. Her first thought was that someone had broken in. Her second was much worse. She moved slowly toward the living room, careful not to let the floorboards creak. When she reached the doorway, she saw them. Kendrick and LaToya were on the couch, limbs tangled, completely absorbed in each other. This was not clumsy, impulsive betrayal. This was practiced, intimate familiarity. I have missed you, Kendrick murmured, pressing his forehead to LaToya's. Pretending with her is exhausting. LaToya laughed softly. Not much longer. Once we get her committed, we will have access to everything. And if there is nothing, we will at least be rid of her. Naomi's breath left her body in a silent rush. Committed. They were not just cheating. They were planning to have her declared mentally incompetent. Are you sure Dr. Lang will go along with it? Kendrick asked, his voice low. He owes me favors, LaToya replied. A few sessions where Naomi seems confused and unstable, some medication to make that look real, and he will sign whatever we need. Poor Kendrick, just trying to get help for his wife who is losing touch with reality. Who is going to question that? Naomi backed away one step at a time, her heart pounding. She did not remember how she got back to her car, only that she ended up in a booth at a 24-hour diner, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of her. She replayed every word in her mind. The plan to commit her, to gain control of her accounts, to move on to another woman in another city if she did not produce the wealth they imagined. Over the next several days, Naomi pretended everything was normal. She smiled when Kendrick smiled. She answered LaToya's questions with the same careful vagueness as before. But now she watched them, and while they watched her, she recorded them. She bought a small digital recorder and hid it in the living room, then another in the kitchen. In the evenings, she listened to their conversations in her car, collecting evidence as they discussed forged medical records, fake witness statements from people LaToya had paid to claim Naomi acted erratically in public, and the commitment papers Kendrick was preparing to file. She has been so paranoid lately, Kendrick said in one recording. Always thinking people are going through her things. It is perfect. Her real suspicions will sound like delusions. And if she says we are having an affair? LaToya replied. That just makes her look more unstable. Naomi realized she could not fight this alone. One evening, she parked outside the same diner where Kendrick had once made her laugh over his clumsy attempts at budgeting and stared at her phone for a long time. Her finger hovered over a number she had not dialed in 3 years. Finally, she pressed it. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, and then a familiar voice answered. Hello, Daddy, Naomi said, her throat tightening. It is me. I need help. There was a pause, the kind that stretches the space between two people like a fragile thread. Then Justice Leonard Ellis sighed softly. Naomi, he said, tell me everything. Sitting in her childhood bedroom in her father's house in Washington, Naomi told him about Kendrick and LaToya, about the affair, about the plan to have her committed so they could take control of her finances. She showed him the recordings, the forged documents she had photographed, the bank papers naming Kendrick as temporary guardian during her supposed treatment. Justice Ellis listened without interrupting, his hands folded, his expression carved in stone. When she finished, he asked only one question. "Do you want to come home and leave this behind? Or do you want to fight?" "I want to fight," Naomi said. "But I cannot do it as the quiet bookkeeper they think they can break. I have to do it as your daughter. I have to do it as the lawyer I was before everything fell apart." 3 years earlier, before she vanished from Washington, Naomi Ellis had been one of the most promising young legal minds in the country. She had gone to Harvard Law School at 22, graduating at the top of her class. She clerked for Justice Elaine Cooper on the Supreme Court, then joined a prestigious firm in Washington, where she specialized in constitutional and civil rights cases. By 27, she had argued 3 cases before the highest court and won them all. Legal journals called her a future legend. Some whispered that she might one day sit on the same bench as her father. But while Naomi thrived under that pressure, her younger brother Jerome crumbled beneath it. Jerome tried law school, then business school, then journalism. Nothing fit. He lived like a man standing just outside his own life, watching it pass him by. The constant comparisons to his father and sister, the cameras outside their Georgetown home, the questions at every family event, it wore him down. He started drinking heavily in college and never truly stopped. Naomi tried to help. She drove him to treatment programs, covered for him when he missed important events, stepped in when he showed up drunk to a function where their father was speaking. But on the night of Leonard Ellis's 60th birthday celebration, when the house was filled with politicians and judges, Naomi had been too busy networking and smiling for cameras to watch Jerome closely enough. The call came at 2 in the morning. Jerome's car had left the road on a wet stretch of highway outside the city. The impact killed him instantly. The headlines were merciless. News anchors debated the cost of success and the pressure on the children of powerful public figures. Naomi stood beside her father at the funeral, cameras flashing as strangers dissected her brother's life on television. In the weeks that followed, guilt hollowed her out. She resigned from her firm, withdrew from the next Supreme Court case she was supposed to argue, sold her townhouse, and disappeared. "I cannot be your daughter in public anymore," she had told her father. "I cannot live under that lens. I just want to be a normal person." He had put a hand on her shoulder and said, "You cannot run from who you are forever, but I will not chase you. When you are ready, you know where home is." Now Naomi sat in his study again, the walls lined with law books and framed opinions. She was no longer the grieving sister who needed to disappear. She was the woman Kendrick and LaToya had underestimated. "We will do this properly," Justice Ellis said. Within days, Naomi had a legal team that made Kendrick's small-town strategy look fragile. Attorney Carla Benson, a Harvard classmate who now led a prominent criminal division, agreed to take the case. Malcolm Price, a former federal investigator known for dismantling complex fraud schemes, joined them. Dr. Nadine Porter, a forensic psychologist with a reputation for exposing dishonest evaluations, reviewed the fake psychiatric report prepared by Dr. Harold Lang. Naomi herself, with her deep knowledge of constitutional protections and due process, began mapping out a strategy that turned Kendrick and LaToya's plan back on them. "They have made several critical mistakes," Naomi told her team during their first meeting in her father's study. "First, they are attempting to commit someone against her while using fabricated evidence. That is both civil and criminal fraud. Second, they are using forged medical records and paid witnesses to support a fraudulent guardianship. That is theft by deception. Third, they have been carrying on an affair during the entire marriage, which affects asset division." Malcolm flipped through the files. "They also crossed state lines when they targeted their previous victims," he said. "That means federal charges. And we already have leads on 3 women they did this to before you." Naomi stared at the photos of those women, faces strained with grief and shame. 2 had been committed to psychiatric facilities. 1 had taken her own life after losing everything. "We are not just stopping them for me," Naomi said. "We are stopping them for everyone they hurt and everyone they would have hurt next." While Carla prepared motions and subpoenas and Malcolm dug through financial records, Naomi allowed Kendrick and LaToya to believe their plan was working. She attended appointments with Dr. Lang, who asked leading questions and scribbled notes that bore little resemblance to her actual answers. She recorded every session. Dr. Porter later compared Lang's written evaluation to Naomi's recordings and highlighted every inconsistency. Meanwhile, Malcolm uncovered the truth about Kendrick's consulting business. It was mostly smoke and mirrors, a few small clients propped up by money funneled from LaToya's relationships with wealthy older men. Together, Kendrick and LaToya had spent years running romantic cons, targeting women they believed had hidden assets. Naomi was supposed to be just another chapter in that pattern. Carla raised another concern during one of their late-night strategy meetings. "This will not stay private," she said. "Once your identity is revealed in court, the media will swarm. We can try to control the story, but it will still be public." Naomi stared at the map of states where Kendrick and LaToya had operated. "My identity is going to come out anyway if they push this," she replied. "The only question is whether I appear as a victim who quietly accepted defeat or as someone who fought back and made sure they could not hurt anyone else. I choose the second one." Justice Ellis watched her with pride and a trace of sadness. He had once feared that the law would consume his daughter. He never imagined it would be her shield against people who thought she had no protection. On the morning of the divorce hearing, Kendrick woke feeling triumphant. The steady October rain outside his window seemed like a cleansing, washing away the last traces of a marriage he considered a failed investment. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, imagining the look on Naomi's face when Dr. Lang's evaluation came up and when the judge signed the order for commitment. LaToya met him at her apartment, suitcase already packed for a quick trip to Florida, where she was lining up their next target, a recently widowed real estate agent with significant assets. "Remember," LaToya said as she checked her lipstick in the hallway mirror, "you are the concerned husband. You just want help for your unstable wife. I am the worried sister-in-law." Kendrick nodded. "We stick to the story, and by next week we will be free." Neither of them had bothered to research Judge Parker beyond his reputation for being strict with difficult spouses. Neither had considered that he might recognize the name Ellis. Back in the courtroom, the recess dragged on just long enough for panic to take root at the plaintiff's table. Mr. Everett paced, phone pressed to his ear, trying to confirm what he had just heard about Naomi's father. LaToya sat rigid, eyes fixed on Naomi, who now spoke calmly with Carla and Malcolm. A federal prosecutor, Mr. Jameson, slipped into the second row behind Naomi's table, notebook open, listening quietly as Carla handed him a folder. When Judge Parker returned, the air in the room felt different, as if some invisible line had shifted. He adjusted his robe and looked between the two tables with the weary patience of a man who knew he was about to preside over something bigger than a routine divorce. "We are back on the record in Brooks versus Brooks," Judge Parker said, his voice steady. "During our recess, certain information came to light regarding the identity of the defendant, Ms. Naomi Ellis Brooks. Given her connection to Supreme Court Justice Leonard Ellis, I believe it is necessary to examine the plaintiff's claims with particular care." Mr. Everett cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client's petition is based on clear evidence of mental instability. We will see how clear that evidence is," the judge replied. "I would like to begin with the psychiatric recommendation. Dr. Harold Lang, please approach." The physician who had been sitting stiffly in the front row rose and made his way to the stand, adjusting his tie nervously. His confidence had already begun to erode. Under Carla's questioning and Judge Parker's pointed follow-ups, Dr. Lang's report fell apart in minutes. "Doctor," Carla said, flipping through pages of his evaluation, "you state here that Naomi exhibited disorganized thinking, paranoid delusions, and emotional volatility. How many in-person sessions did you have with her?" Dr. Lang swallowed. "The evaluation was based primarily on reports from her husband and sister-in-law. Given my experience, I am able to—" "So you never met her?" Carla interrupted. "Not formally," he admitted. Judge Parker leaned forward. "Doctor, are you asking this court to commit a woman to psychiatric care based on secondhand descriptions alone? With no direct examination?" Dr. Lang hesitated. Carla slid another document toward the clerk. "Your Honor, we also have records from the medical board documenting prior disciplinary actions against Dr. Lang for falsifying evaluations in custody disputes." Next came the so-called witnesses, 3 individuals who had submitted statements claiming they had seen Naomi behaving erratically in public. Under cross-examination, their stories crumbled. One admitted he had never actually met Naomi and had been paid in cash by LaToya to sign a prepared statement. Another contradicted herself so dramatically that even Mr. Everett stopped objecting. As each testimony collapsed, Naomi watched Kendrick's posture shrink. His shoulders drooped. His confident mask slipped. LaToya's eyeliner began to smudge as she wiped at the corners of her eyes with a shaking hand. The plan that had seemed so airtight around their kitchen table was dissolving under the bright light of a courtroom that refused to play along. "Your Honor," Carla said at last, her voice clear. My client would like to submit additional evidence. Recorded conversations between Kendrick and LaToya Brooks, documentation of forged medical records, and investigative reports linking them to similar schemes involving 3 other women in other states. Malcolm moved to the front with a binder. For the next hour, the courtroom listened as Kendrick and LaToya's own words filled the air. Plans to drug Naomi so she would appear unstable, discussions about how to explain away their affair as delusions, jokes about moving on to the next woman in Florida once they had drained Naomi's accounts. There were references to 2 previous victims who had been committed and another who had taken her own life after being ruined financially. Naomi sat still, hands folded, listening to the ugliest parts of her life play out like a recording of someone else's nightmare. When the last recording ended, the room was utterly silent. Judge Parker stared at Kendrick and LaToya with open disgust. Mr. Brooks, he said slowly, do you understand that what you have attempted to do is not merely cruel but criminal? You sought to use this court as a weapon to falsely commit your wife to a psychiatric facility so you could steal her assets. Kendrick stood shakily. Your Honor, we thought she was lying to us about her family, he said, words tumbling out. She told me she had no parents, no money. We thought she was hiding something, and You thought you had found someone vulnerable. The judge cut in. You thought she was alone and powerless. That does not excuse what you did. It only reveals the extent of your malice. LaToya rose as well, eyes bright with desperate tears. Your Honor, this is being blown out of proportion, she said. We are a family. We made mistakes, but we never meant for it to go this far. Judge Parker's gaze was ice cold. Ms. Brooks, I have listened to recordings of you planning to drug your sister-in-law and discussing your next victim in Florida. You paid people to lie to this court. You have done this before. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a pattern of exploitation. He turned to Naomi. Ms. Ellis, or Ms. Brooks, however you wish to be addressed, would you like to respond? Naomi stood, feeling the weight of the courtroom's attention settle on her. For the first time since she left Washington, she did not try to shrink away from it. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. 3 years ago, I walked away from a legal career because I believed the public attention surrounding my family had cost my brother his life. I wanted a quiet existence. I changed my name. I took a job as a bookkeeper. When I met Kendrick, I thought I had finally found someone who wanted exactly that kind of life. She gestured toward the evidence. Instead, I discovered that Kendrick and LaToya targeted me because they believed I was lying about my past in a different way, that I was hiding wealth. They married me under false pretenses, maintained an affair throughout our marriage, and conspired to have me falsely committed to a psychiatric facility so they could gain control of my finances. Naomi continued, her gaze never leaving the judge. I lied about one thing, she said. I told Kendrick my parents were dead when they are very much alive. I did it to escape the pressure and scrutiny of being Justice Ellis's daughter. That lie was about survival, not deception for gain. Kendrick and LaToya's lies were about greed. They were willing to destroy my freedom and my future for money that does not even exist. The savings they tried to steal, roughly $50,000, came from years of quiet work as a bookkeeper, not from any family fortune. They risked everything to prey on what they thought was weakness. She drew in a breath. They misjudged me. Judge Parker looked toward the table behind Naomi, where Mr. Jameson, the federal prosecutor, sat with his notebook. Mr. Jameson, the judge said, based on what you have seen and heard today, does your office intend to pursue charges? Mr. Jameson stood. Yes, Your Honor, he replied. We will be filing charges against Kendrick and LaToya Brooks for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft by deception, falsification of medical records, and related offenses. We are also investigating their previous conduct in other states. Kendrick sagged back into his chair, eyes unfocused. The room seemed to tilt around him. The petition he had filed so casually was gone, replaced by something far heavier than he had ever anticipated. As for the civil matter, Judge Parker continued, the plaintiff's petition for divorce and commitment is denied. Ms. Ellis, through her counsel, has filed a counter-petition based on adultery and fraud, along with civil claims for emotional distress and conspiracy. Given the evidence presented, those claims are granted. All marital assets are awarded to Ms. Ellis, and both defendants are ordered to pay restitution and damages in an amount to be determined at a later hearing. LaToya let out a strangled sound. Kendrick stared straight ahead. Furthermore, the judge added, This court issues restraining orders prohibiting either defendant from contacting Ms. Ellis or approaching within 500 feet of her. Federal marshals will escort them from the courthouse and into custody pending formal charges. As the marshals moved toward them, Kendrick looked at Naomi one last time. She stood with Carla and Malcolm, Dr. Porter at her side, shoulders straight, expression calm. In that moment, he realized that the quiet woman he had married had never been fragile at all. She had been resting. She had been grieving. And when he tried to break her, she had stepped back into the power she had chosen to put away. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but there was nothing left to say that would change anything. The marshals took him by the arms and led him toward the door, while Naomi turned back to her attorneys to discuss the next steps in the civil and criminal proceedings. 6 months later, Kendrick sat at a metal table in a federal holding facility, wearing an orange jumpsuit with his last name stamped on the chest. The case had become a media spectacle. News outlets ran segments about romantic fraud and exploitation, focusing on the story of a woman who had walked away from a high-profile legal career only to be targeted by people who thought she was an easy mark. Headlines read, "Con artists target justice's daughter," and "Bookkeeper fights back and exposes romance fraud ring." Kendrick's photo appeared beside LaToya's and Dr. Lang's, all three of them frozen in unflattering mugshots that now define them in the public imagination. The list of charges against Kendrick and LaToya was long. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft by deception, falsification of medical records, mail fraud, wire fraud, and more based on what federal investigators found in other states. LaToya had tried to cut a deal, offering to testify against Kendrick in exchange for leniency. But the recordings Naomi had made showed LaToya as the instigator in many of the schemes, the one who identified potential victims and pushed for more aggressive tactics. Dr. Lang lost his medical license and received 5 years in prison for medical fraud. The 3 witnesses who had lied under oath accepted probation in exchange for cooperation. Kendrick's own sentence, 8 years, felt like an eternity, and yet it paled in comparison to the life he had thrown away. The civil trial that followed was even more devastating to Kendrick's ego. Naomi's legal team presented a meticulous narrative of his and LaToya's pattern of exploitation. They brought in relatives of the previous victims, including the sister of the woman who had taken her own life. The jury awarded Naomi not only full restitution of her savings, but substantial punitive damages as well. On top of that, Naomi helped the families of the other victims file their own claims. By the time the judgments were entered, Kendrick knew that even after he served his sentence, he would be paying for his actions in one form or another for the rest of his life. One afternoon, Kendrick met with his court-appointed attorney in a small room with peeling paint and a flickering fluorescent light. "You targeted the wrong person," the lawyer said bluntly, tapping a file. "If you had done even basic research beyond trying to sniff out imaginary money, you would have learned that Naomi Ellis argued 3 cases before the Supreme Court and won them all before she disappeared from public life. You would have known that her father has connections throughout the legal system and that she grew up understanding how evidence works. She was not defenseless. She chose to live quietly until you forced her hand." Kendrick stared at the table. "She seemed so normal," he said. "So quiet." The lawyer shrugged. "She was quiet because she was grieving. Normal because she chose a smaller life for a while. You mistook that for weakness. That mistake cost you everything." 1 year after the trial, Naomi sat in the conference room of Ellis and Associates, the law firm she had founded with her father's support. The space felt different from the places she used to work. There were law books and framed articles on the walls, but there were also soft chairs, warm colors, and artwork chosen to calm rather than intimidate. Across from her sat a woman in her mid-40s, hands twisting nervously in her lap. "My name is Angela Ford," the woman said. "I teach high school. I should have known better. I talked to my students about being safe online, and then I did the very thing I warned them about." Naomi shook her head gently. "You are not alone," she said. "Please tell me what happened." Angela described how someone had contacted her through a social media site, claiming to be a businessman working overseas. Over 8 months, he had convinced her that they were in love, that they were going to build a life together once he returned. He had stories about frozen accounts, delayed transfers, and business deals on the brink of success. Each story came with a request for money. At first the amounts were small. Then they grew, and Angela, lonely and hopeful, kept sending what she could. "By the time I realized it was all a lie," she whispered, "my retirement savings were gone." My family thinks I was foolish. I feel like I do not have a right to be angry because I handed it over. Angela, Naomi said, leaning forward, these people are professionals at manipulating emotions. They study how to gain trust and how to keep victims isolated. This is not about intelligence. It is about vulnerability and timing. It was not your fault that someone decided to prey on your desire for companionship. Angela's eyes filled with tears. Do you think we can get any of it back? Naomi did not hesitate. We will do everything we can to trace the funds and hold the perpetrators accountable. And even if we cannot recover all the money, we can make sure law enforcement has what they need to shut down the people who did this to you. After Angela left, Naomi returned to her office, where case files covered her desk in neat stacks. In the year since the trial, her practice had grown rapidly. Victim advocacy groups referred clients who had nowhere else to turn. Law enforcement agencies reached out for guidance on building stronger fraud cases. Law schools invited her to speak about her experience and about the legal vulnerabilities that romantic con artists exploited. She had also started a foundation, funded in part by the civil damages awarded in her case, to provide legal assistance and counseling to victims of romantic and financial exploitation. Every file on her desk represented someone who had been told they were foolish, when the truth was that someone else had been cruel. Her assistant knocked on the door. Naomi, she said with a small smile, your husband called. He is on his way to pick you up for dinner. Naomi smiled back. She had kept Ellis as her professional name, but in her private life she had taken her husband's last name. Thank you, she replied. I will wrap up here. Minutes later, Dr. Avery Hayes appeared in the doorway, still wearing his hospital badge and scrubs, his expression brightening the moment he saw her. Long day? He asked, stepping into the room. Naomi nodded. Worth it, though. I took on a new case. A teacher whose retirement savings were stolen by an online scammer. Avery's eyes softened. Then they are in the right place. Avery worked as a hospital administrator at a large medical center, and his passion was protecting vulnerable patients from financial abuse. When Naomi met him at a victims' rights conference, he had been presenting on the patterns of financial exploitation among elderly patients. They fell into conversation afterward and discovered they both believed that justice was not just about punishing wrongdoers, but about building systems that prevented harm in the first place. Now, as he sat on the edge of her desk, he reached for her hand. The board approved my proposal, Avery said, his voice tinged with excitement. We are going to implement a program to train all staff to recognize signs of elder financial abuse. Nurses, social workers, even billing staff. Everyone will know what to look for. That is incredible, Naomi said, her smile widening. How many people do you think it will help? Hundreds at our hospital alone, Avery replied. Maybe thousands if other hospitals adopt similar programs. The goal is to intervene before someone's life savings disappear. They talked for a few more minutes about their respective cases, trading stories of small victories and stubborn obstacles. It was the kind of conversation Naomi had never been able to have with Kendrick, who had only been interested in what he could get in the shortest amount of time. With Avery, the focus was always on who they could protect and how to build something that mattered. Later that evening, they walked together through a park near their home. The air was warm, the sky streaked with the last light of the day. Children played near the swings, and a couple jogged past them, laughing at something one of them had said. Naomi breathed in the quiet, conscious of how different her life felt now compared to the one she had tried to construct in hiding. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Kendrick and LaToya had never tried to destroy you? Avery asked softly. Naomi considered the question. Sometimes, she admitted. I think I would have stayed small, kept pretending that stepping away from the law was the only way to protect myself from grief and expectations. I would have continued balancing other people's books and avoiding cameras. And now? Avery asked. Naomi glanced up at the darkening sky. Now I realize that avoiding who I am did not keep me safe. It just kept me from using what I know to help others. Kendrick and LaToya forced me to remember the part of myself I had locked away. I will never thank them for what they did, but I can admit that their cruelty pushed me back toward my purpose. They paused near a small pond where ducks glided calmly across the surface. Avery slipped his arm around her shoulders, and Naomi leaned into him, feeling grounded in a way she had not imagined possible when she first drove away from Washington 3 years earlier. My father called today, Naomi said after a moment. He wants me to consider applying for a federal judgeship when a seat opens up. There has been talk of expanding a court in our circuit. Avery raised his eyebrows. What did you tell him? That I will think about it, Naomi answered. A year ago, that idea would have terrified me. The cameras, the scrutiny, the expectations. Now it feels different. I know where I stand. I know what kind of judge I would be if I accepted something like that. I would not be trying to live up to my father's reputation. I would be using everything I went through to protect people like Angela, like those women Kendrick and LaToya targeted. Avery smiled. Judge Naomi Ellis Hayes, he said quietly, testing the name. It has a certain rhythm to it. Naomi laughed. If it ever happens, I might keep that, she said. I would want to honor both families, the one I was born into and the one we are building. They fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the soft rush of leaves and distant city sounds. Naomi thought about Kendrick in his cell, about LaToya in another facility, about the network of people they had harmed. She did not feel joy at their suffering, but she felt no sorrow either. What she felt was a clear sense of distance, as if that part of her life had been sealed behind a door she no longer needed to open. Ready to go home? Avery asked as the last light faded. Naomi nodded. I am, she said, and she meant more than just the walk back to their house. They made their way along the path, fingers intertwined. Their home was a place where they hosted dinners for friends, where case files sometimes ended up spread across the dining room table, where they talked late into the night about how to make systems fairer for people who did not have famous names or powerful parents. Naomi had finally reached a point where every piece of her life fit together. The daughter of a Supreme Court justice, the lawyer who walked away, the woman who survived betrayal, the advocate who returned to the law on her own terms, the wife who was loved for who she was and not for what she could offer. As they turned onto their street, porch lights flickering on one by one, Naomi thought of all the women whose stories crossed her desk, of the lives under threat from people who saw vulnerability as opportunity. She knew there would always be more cases, more victims, more predators. But she also knew she was no longer running from her own story. The people who had once tried to use her secrets against her had inadvertently freed her from the fear of being seen. She had stepped back into the light with her head high, ready to spend the rest of her life making sure that when justice came for others, it came as fully and completely as it had for her. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.